Tuesday exercise, there's like this to-do list, and there's a little thing in the corner saying diet secrets. And I feel like for some of you, maybe a majority of you, you take on your grief with your body image, which that's kind of interesting. So I'm going to take a second to kind of tap into that. It's almost like you're using your image as a barrier from facing the grief, because I'm hearing a lot of times whenever you're, how it's kind of manifesting within your subconscious is that I'm not good enough. And some of it is like, well, this person passed away or this person left, and because of that, I am not good enough to receive love. And if only I were better, then maybe I would have received the love that I needed. And that's absolutely not true. And I think maybe this particular piece of you is trying to get you to pay attention to what you're actually doing to yourself in regards to how you look at yourself in the mirror and how that image presents itself, but also how are you actually reflecting reality, you know, because like again, this is a distorted image in the mirror where that's not the true reality. And this self-hatred and self-loathing of looking in the mirror, it's distorting your ability to actually view your grief, regardless of if it's from a death or from being disconnected from a parent or caregiver or something. But that distortion is ultimately causing you to really hurt yourself in a lot of different ways. And make sure that, you know, I feel like this message is particular for a couple of you, but know the difference between what is self-care and what is self-idealization. Because I feel like some of you put such a pressure on yourself to always look perfect. And especially with like managing your feelings or whatever. And in this particular case, like especially with grief, like people grieve how they grieve, and being able to accept yourself for how you grieve and not what you want to grieve like, I think will be a really huge step for you to reach when you're coming towards self-acceptance. Um, this next one is you've got like this crazy cat lady who's got this coffee, she's all disheveled, and you know, there's cats everywhere, and there's a little chaotic. I have a feeling that you're very just kind of tired. Um, and you're just kind of accepting of the fact that, you know what, things are crazy and I'm just going to take everything one day at a time. But there's also, though, this feeling of you're not taking care of yourself, though, because you're so exhausted, and because there's a certain degree of caring about yourself in a way that will help you gain energy to do the things that you need to do, instead of just kind of avoiding the mess or whatever. If that makes any sense. I have a feeling that you have a tendency to let yourself go whenever you're in one of these depression bouts, and you're like, well, it is what it is, and it's like, well, yes, technically, however, you know, being able to take care of yourself during those times is really important, you know, and like obviously you don't have to be pushing yourself to a point where, you know, you burn yourself out, but making sure you're taking care of yourself even on the bad days, you know, and celebrating the wins when you have them, is really important when you're managing this inner child wound. But this is one of the ways it kind of manifests, is it's almost like you kind of don't care, but at the same time, I don't know how to put it into proper words. Like, you kind of don't care, but you do. You're just not able to fully kind of address the full spectrum of how you're handling it. So, just take it one day at a time, people. You know, and again, I find it interesting that these two cards are next to each other. We've got, you know, the one viewing yourself as a slob, you know, and distorted image, and then you've got this person here that's not quite entirely getting by all right. And I think that these two pieces of yourself are always conflicting, because on the one hand you're being like, oh, well, I'm lazy, I'm not put together, or whatever. But it could also be, well, maybe you actually are having it together and you just can't see it because you've got this distorted image. I feel like these two pieces are really important for you to maybe sit and kind of dwell on for a little bit. The next one is this card, which is the grief. It's like you're feeling that absence of you're always looking for that ghost that's kind of haunting you in a lot of different areas. And the one thing about this image, you know, is it's trying to find peace. You're really looking for inner peace with this situation and managing that absence of whatever it is in this grieving process. This piece of you is trying to come into fruition of the acceptance of what's going on, and how you find that inner peace is kind of up to you after kind of reflecting and healing some of those other dynamics we were talking about earlier. But that's what your piece of you is trying to reach. Alright, and so the next card is this exploration. So I have a feeling like you're really trying to look outside of yourself and explore. I feel like that while you're really dealing with this grief type energy, there's still a lot of energy within you where you're trying to focus on the future. And that's something you should pat yourself on the back on, is that even though at times you feel like you're weighed down by everything that's happened to you in the past, you're still moving on and going forward. And that's a part that you should acknowledge within yourself, that, you know, you can overcome these types of wounds, and there's pieces of you that are doing it all the time that you don't give credit for. And that's something that keep looking for ways to not only just heal yourself, but also enjoy the moment. I have a feeling that this is also telling at least a couple of you, look for new opportunities, and keep your eyes on what's out there and available to you. Because, like, part of me, I was about to say that, you know, looking into the future, but I realized for this particular wound, you don't want to be looking into the future too much, because you need to somewhat reflect on the past before you can kind of move forward. But keeping your eyes open and being willing to go on a new adventure after you kind of heal a bunch of this stuff would be really good for you to pay attention to. And then finally, we've got this card, which we've got this girl just kind of laying depressed in the corner. I feel like this is your depression side that has a tendency to bump up against your relationships. Now, in this image, she looks like a young woman, so maybe she could be a young adult, but I'm definitely getting some, like, angsty teen vibes from some of you, where it's almost like this apathetic, you know, well, nothing really matters, or I can't get rid of this. You know, I'm just going to turn my head away from people and, like, I'll just be, you know, okay, fine, I guess I'll accept this. It's like, it's almost like this kind of, you know, a little, I don't want to say immature, but it's like a younger energy of either maybe something that manifests in your teenage years, or that's just kind of like the age of that part within yourself. But definitely this piece of you is trying to find ways of just being able to cope, and it doesn't really know how to. Or it's kind of unwilling. I'm feeling like this kind of resistance that's like, well, nothing's going to get better, so why should I work on it? You know, why should I, you know, reach out? Or it's just kind of like trying to self-sabotage a little bit too. So I think maybe addressing your feelings in regards to this piece of yourself would be kind of useful for being able to work through the wound, because the wound is from something much younger, but I feel like something when you got a lot older is also being affected with this dynamic as well. But, okay. Alright, so those are your inner child parts. So next I'm going to be pulling some messages from your inner child that you need to hear towards yourself, and then I'm going to be pulling some guidance cards on what you can do to help heal this wound. So, okay, so what does your inner child have to say to you? Else? Okay, more. No more? Okay. Alright, so you got 5 cards here. Man, we've been moving in 5s a lot for these readings so far. So, okay. Okay, so what you got was I couldn't tell you face to face. I'm waiting for an apology. I forgive you. I do wish you well. And I pretend you don't mean that much. So these are all messages of you to yourself, and I have a feeling for a lot of you, there's a lot of just, once you actually gain the strength to be able to access these feelings, a lot of the feelings you've had pent up is really going to be released. And I feel like for some of you, you even feel relieved hearing some of these words like this. I couldn't tell you face to face. I have a feeling that this is you to yourself saying that you couldn't directly face your feelings to yourself, if that makes any sense. Because again, from like previous earlier in the reading, you know, you're someone who you're in the logical space all the time, that when you're in your head, you can't appropriately respond to your feelings. And you have to be honest with yourself that you weren't in a place to do that before, but now you can. And now you can emotionally hold a place for that grieving side of yourself. I'm waiting for an apology. There's a lot of self-forgiveness that's going to need to be happening, and just telling yourself I'm sorry is going to be very, very cathartic to some of you, and being brave enough to apologize. Oh God, I'm like feeling like I'm tearing up. Especially for some of your self-destructive behaviors that you've done in the past, or the hatred that you've put towards the situation, or maybe the person who was gone and couldn't help you. Like, getting this apology from yourself to yourself is going to be very crucial towards you and your healing journey of this wound. And again, this might make you bawl even more, but it says like, I forgive you. So even though you've been running from this grief for a long time, that piece of you wants you to know that it does forgive you for not being able to take care of it. Oh shit, I'm tearing up. One sec. Yeah, okay. Sorry, that got real. Okay, but yeah, it's saying that it's okay, and that, you know, when you are willing to face that, maybe you're not ready right now, but you're able to forgive yourself, and it's going to be okay. You can let this go, and you are strong enough to be able to receive that forgiveness and willingly give it towards yourself. And then I do wish you well. You know, you do want to take care of yourself, even if you've either self-harmed in some capacity, self-sabotage, whatever you've done in the past. Once you kind of understand that you weren't doing it because you hated yourself, it's because you didn't know how to cope. Understand that there's a lot of you that is wishing you well and cheering you on. Just because you don't feel it doesn't mean that it's not going on. I mean, you saw earlier with my cards of all the different parts, you know, just when you're in that negative state, you can't see those other sides of you. But there's a lot of you that does want better for yourself and does want to be healed from this. And acknowledging that you do have pieces of yourself, regardless of how depressed you feel, there is enough of you that wants to get better, and it's cheering you on. And then I pretend that you don't mean that much. Which, again, some of you are very in denial of how much this grief has affected you. And the moment you stop pretending of how hurt you're actually feeling is the moment you're going to be able to really start make some progress on many areas of your life that are being affected by this. And take as long as you need, because I feel like for some of you, the grief is a very heavy thing that you're not going to be able to face all at once, so I don't recommend unlocking it all at once. However, the less you can lie to yourself and pretend that you're not okay, the faster this healing process is going to go. And it's going to release a lot of resistance, too, that you're holding. And just be honest with yourself. That's what a lot of you wants, is it wants to be released from this grief, and the first start of that is just not lying to yourself. Oh, that was heavy. Oh gosh. Okay. Alright, so next we're going to be getting guidance on what can you do to heal this inner child wound, like steps that you can take. What can you do to heal this inner child wound? Okay. Anything else? Alright, I'm gonna... Anything else? Okay, just put a cap on it there. Alright. So we've got 5 once again. I know earlier in this reading I said I wasn't going to read reversals, and I'm doing it now, so. Sorry if you came back from part 1. I'm just playing these by the seat of my pants. But, okay. So I have a feeling I'm going to need to read the book for this one. Because I feel like there might be some messages in there that a few of you might really need to resonate with. So, the cards you got was no-thingness, or nothingness, but it's specifically hyphenated. But it's that in reverse. You have 3 experiencing. You have awareness, which you've got like this beautiful lady. Actually, it kind of looks like it's more that inner child work of a person with a child that's kind of bursting out of them like a weird alien. You have control, and then you have the creator, which, oh my gosh, I don't want to even go into these individual cards because I feel like it's pretty telling right off the bat. Like, again, this resistance of the no-thingness. I feel like you really, some of you definitely experience a frequent, like, existential crisis that this grief has kind of put you into that place of, like, what is the value of my own life? What is this space inside of me that, you know, I can't seem to ever fill? And I feel like, oh God, I was going to say, I feel like what some of you are struggling with is one of those really deep, like, either it's like a spiritual crisis or something about, like, there's just this void that terrifies the hell out of you. And for some of you, that void it's deeper than your depression. Some of you, you see your depression as this void, or there's just a piece of you that you literally just, you don't know. It's blank. You can't feel, you can't hear, it's numb, it's just nothingness. And that nothingness scares the crap out of you. And I think being willing to admit that, one, there's this nothingness there, and understanding that, I think it's learning to accept this nothingness and not have an expectation from it. Just, this is something that is and always will be, and you don't, like, the more logic you try to apply towards this feeling, this void, this space that's in your life, the less you're going to get anywhere and the more depressed you're going to be, because this is more about existentialism than an actual, like, feeling or a thought, or it's just a space. And you won't be able to really come to terms with this until you kind of work on all the other things that are kind of going on in this dynamic. So, like, one of them, so we've got this card right here, this experiencing. I have a feeling that, like, you need to just sit and feel your emotions out. I know that you've been running from it for a long time and you're very scared, but the moment you start taking the time to release these feelings and just experiencing that grief, it will help release it. And so, again, when I kind of said earlier, way at the very beginning, there's some of you that you're just constantly crying and it just doesn't seem to ever get better. And a lot of it is, what is the thing you're actually experiencing with your sadness? How deep is the actual wound. Are you grieving yourself? Are you grieving this dynamic? Like, what exactly is causing you to cry? Because crying alone, yeah, it releases, but when you're doing it so often that it's unproductive, there's an unproductive type of crying where you don't release anything. And I have a feeling some of you have been in that space. Other of you, you just don't cry enough. But being able to experience this wound and really, once you've identified what that pain is, then you can properly grieve it and then you can properly release it. Because before, you were just crying and there was no control over it. There was no just like, it was just kind of happening and you're feeling like, again, it's funny, I completely forgot this control card was here. But it's understanding that you have control of how you process your emotions and how you allow yourself to come across towards yourself. Because again, for those of you that either, actually, I feel like a lot of you in this reading, you feel like you don't have control over your emotions. You don't have control of, well, if I tap into this grief and this inner child, I'm going to lose control. And that's not the case, because you got to be able to create a space for your grief so it doesn't consume your life and it doesn't take up. I think that's where some of you, especially in the past, you view that release as not being able to properly take care of yourself because you didn't have control in the past. You didn't know how to cope properly, and so what was happening was you just experienced just frustration and some of you violence or grief and all these emotions, and you were like, well, I can't go back in that space again. And so being able to create a way to release your emotions without completely giving it completely control over yourself will really benefit you. Either, I mean, for some of you, meditation might work. But I have a feeling like, not gonna lie, there's a bunch of people on this reading right now that you're like, I've already tried meditation. It doesn't do shit. And for those of you that are in this position, I think finding ways of actually going within yourself and doing things that will trigger this wound will get you to start being able to reflect and be able to access it. Do it in small chunks. Like, again, have control when you're accessing this, because of the fact that you don't want to lose control. You don't want to lose sight of your life while you're going through this process